It's Guy Fawkes night. Was V for Vendetta some sort of portal to the future? Let's have a little think about Guy Fawkes night and a look at V for Vendetta to see if it's an eerie window into the future. How many things they foresaw have since come true. Here's some basic things about V for Vendetta. It's set in 2020. Ooh, it just was 2020. V for Vendetta's director, James McTeague, says the decision to pick 2020 as the year in which the film was set was simply a coincidence. When we set the film, we were just abstracting into the future, said McTeague. Is it good fortune, the timing, or something that happens every once in a while? I just don't know. There are many themes, ideas, and moments in the film that do seem eerily resonant. Let's have a look.
I wish I wasn't afraid all the time, but I am.
That's what you want from Natalie Portman, isn't it? Her expertly rendering the way that many of us feel much of the time, a kind of oppressive sense of fear everywhere. It's almost impossible to imagine what life was like in 1605 in Britain, the complexities of the religious sectarian conflict that was going on then, although of course sectarian conflict is ongoing in some places in the world. What interests me is not people of religious faith turning against one another, because I tend to think that most violence is ultimately political, even if it's framed as religious, because it's ultimately about power, and what is power if not politics. Pretty cool costume, I'll say that as well. There was a time here in this country where people were going around in their masks. Of course, the entire anonymous movement used those masks, and it felt pretty edgy and cool. I was involved, you can look at the old videos if you want, in politics around 2015, talking about the futility of voting, the senselessness of institutional power, corruption within the world of high finance. And I had affiliations with people that were involved in some of those organisations, and it fascinated me deeply. Sometimes a movement requires iconography, certainly it requires myths and heroes, because they are useful ways of moving something forward. Storytelling is a very, very powerful vehicle for changing the world. Sometimes I think that certain bureaucratic forms of politics, you know, e.g. on the left, feel sort of grey and dull and stymieing just to listen to. At some point you have to emotionally engage people. You have to get in touch with people's anger and people's fear. V for Vendetta clearly did that. At certain points in recent history, movements like, I don't know, the Yellow Vests or Occupy have touched upon that sense that we need to come together as a people to challenge power.
Gentlemen, I want this terrorist found, and I want him to understand what terror really means.
Also quite cool that John Hurt stars in 1984, the film based on George Orwell's novel, and that the dude playing Guy Fawkes there, or V, is Agent Smith out of the Matrix. Nice to see all these parables and dystopian predictions come together in one object, itself inspired by real historical events and a kind of now somewhat benign cultural tradition of bonfire night. It's fascinating, isn't it, how the system can bring us all together to celebrate the failure or thwarting of people that challenged its ideals. We'll all come together and celebrate, oh wow, someone tried to challenge power. Admittedly, it was a pretty hefty challenge of power. It was going to blow up the Houses of Parliament. That's what the gunpowder plot was. But these were very different times.
People should not be afraid of their governments. Governments should be afraid of their people.
I suppose often when you see parodies of power in cinema, whether it's like The Matrix or this film, you know, both graphic novels that became movies, is necessarily amplified and simplified to conform to archetypal themes and ideas. But these archetypes have resonance because they touch upon truths. Even if it's not literal truths, certain emotional truths are strongly felt when you watch these films. And V for Vendetta really captures the idea of a dystopia and disconnection and an elite cartel that have access to lots of resources and live in a kind of synthetic and abstracted life, which I've sometimes felt part of in my own life, and also at other times in my life I've felt part of an underworld of disconnected people that have no access at all to resources. So a graphic novel, or indeed a film, the nature of V for Vendetta, has to use sort of tropes and images and ideas that are recognisable while also necessarily are also exaggerations.
Those caught in violation of curfew will be prosecuted without leniency or exception.
Other things you'll see in the film are curfews, which of course is, something that we've experienced a lot of, and more importantly, and perhaps more safely to speculate on, a world of total surveillance. In the film, the US is in the middle of fighting a second civil war while fighting off a virus with the rest of the world. That's interesting, isn't it? Because sometimes you look at American politics and culture and think, in fact, many pundits say it feels like a civil war, an ideological war. In fact, if you look at the various phases of warfare, some people say you could regard what's currently happening as a form of warfare. Meanwhile, the UK, where most of the story takes place, is a police state, and its crazed leader attempts to keep order through strict surveillance, control of the media, and by sending anyone deemed undesirable to concentration camps. You can also identify the power of the systems we live within when you witness the fact that they can make stories and films that are about corruption, that present governments as corrupt, that present corporations as sort of faceless, anonymous and venal, and we will consume it as entertainment. It's something that Mark Fisher wrote about extensively, that the system is so robust that it can even present to us sort of truthful and evocative images, and we will still just consume it as entertainment.
Those who are responsible will be held accountable.
Sometimes I think that his bangs are not good. The fringe. I think, grow that out.
This country stands on the edge of oblivion.
I want everyone to remember why they need us.
The idea that we must remember why we need our government, why we need our chains, why we need to be controlled is an ongoing theme that many critics of power, from Foucault to Baudrillard, have looked at extensively. The idea that we now imprison ourselves mentally, internally, the what's that thing, the pentacon or opticon, or you'll know it, Foucault's idea that we feel that we're continually being watched. It was someone else wrote it, Bamfirst. I can't remember all the details, but there was a sort of a perfect prison where you could be seen from wherever you were in that prison. We now live in a surveillance state. We now live with a degree of caution and nervousness about every form of communication and everything we say. We're not certain at all about whether we're doing the right thing. We are living in a kind of comfortable form of tyranny. Now, people will say, oh, yeah, you should go to a real country under tyrants like a Maoist China or Stalinist Russia. And Jesus, I bet there was some heavy shit going on, but there's more than one way to skin a cat.
I suddenly had this feeling that everything was connected. We're all part of it.
Of course, the thing I like most about that film is when people come together and under a mask of anonymity stand up against tyranny. The mask, I suppose, suggesting that your individual identity and the way that you affiliate culturally ain't as important as the solidarity that we can all feel for one another, that together we have more shared interest than we do things that divide us, that if we come together, we can indeed change the world, that it's possible to create new realities, and the people that tell us that it's impossible benefit from things staying the same. Well, that's just what I think about V for Vendetta and Fireworks Night and the idea of revolutionary or radical change, albeit definitely non-violent. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments below. Tell me what you think about that film. If you think it's an eerie prophecy or whether you just think it's a bit of sci-fi fun. Tell me your views of Bonfire Night if you happen to be British. Do you love old Guy Fawkes or do you think of him as a bit of a bad guy? What do you Americans or Australians or people from anywhere in the world, China, Vietnam, wherever you are, Sweden, let me know what you think about this stuff. And please have a little look at this video where I do similar things if you enjoyed this one, and also sign up to my Awakening side channel. Every week I have deep conversations on Luminary on my podcast Under the Skin, and I teach a meditation weekly on Above the Noise. Sign up to my mailing list. I can tell you what I'm reading, what I'm thinking, and we can stay connected for when it really, really matters. Stay free.